Now let's jump into today's issues. Republicans in the Senate. They've made obstruction their standard operating procedure, and nowhere is this more evident than with President Obama's judicial appointments. The lack of confirmations is causing a crisis in the judiciary, and I have Michael Burg with me now to explain what's happening. So, Michael, one of the things that actually came up in the Republican debate recently was whether or not the Republican candidates would have any kind of litmus test for judges. Well, we know what kind of judges the Republican Party wants, and clearly it is at odds with anything that President Obama would want, because right now we're on track to confirm the fewest number of judges, I believe, since 1969. This is part of the Republican policy of obstruction to prevent Obama from being able to fill judicial vacancies. And that's a real problem, isn't it?
Well, it really is. I mean, one of the problems we have, we talk about government shutdown, but in fact, if we don't have enough judges, and right now my understanding is there's 67 vacancies that exist in the federal courts. If we don't have enough judges, in essence, that is shutting down the court system. And that affects everyone. People should understand that there's, time limits on criminal cases. So those cases will take priority. So the civil cases, because of the lack of judges, those cases they go on for years and years and years without being able to get to a trial. And that's a serious problem for the entire judiciary and that branch of the government.
Well, it is, in effect, part of a backhanded government shutdown, what we're seeing from these Republicans in the House and Senate by blocking all of Obama's judicial nominees. And what's happening is that they're not bringing them to the floor for a vote. Obama has nominated, handfuls of judges for many years. This is not just a new phenomenon for this year either. This is something that's been happening really, since Republicans took over the Senate. And so today we have what they're calling a judicial emergency. I mean, we do not have enough judges sitting on the bench to be able to process the number of cases coming through the country right now. And, what's interesting to me is that the judiciary seems to be the branch of government that most people like to forget about until they actually need it. It's not something we follow day to day. We're not, tracking federal court cases on a daily basis. At least the average, U.S. citizen is not. And so this gets overlooked, but this really goes to the heart of how obstructionist the Republican Party has become against President Obama, doesn't it?
Well, you know what? I want to make sure that our viewers understand that, the judiciary is probably the last hope for many, many people in this country. The Congress is, because of Citizens United, is bought and paid for. The presidential PACs, these people running for president, they're going to be owing and owe people all the way down the road, and whoever is president is going to have to make sure that they have a payback to all those billionaires who are giving them money. And it goes on both sides of the aisle. The judiciary is supposed to be independent, and without having the number of judges that we need, it creates a problem, which is, for most citizens, their last hope of getting justice is in the judiciary, is in front of a court, in front of a jury, having a trial, having jury of their peers decide something, a very important issue. And without the judges, that's impossible to have that happen in any reasonable amount of time. It's a way, again, but I think it's important, the judges that are being picked, the way in the process is the U.S. senators are the ones who come forward with the nominations. In most states, in Wyoming, it's the governor, but it's either the governor or the U.S. senators. And so if you have two Republican senators or you have one Republican and one Democrat, those senators can have a difference of agreement, never agree who to send to the president. And then once it's sent to the president, then the senators have to do a blue slip and be able to get them to get onto the floor. If you go through the congressional record, generally those judges are confirmed without debate, and many of them are confirmed in groups. But if you never get that confirmation hearing, that person who's been nominated sits and sits and sits, and we've had numerous cases where that person then withdraws their name because they figure, this is not happening, I can't wait any longer, I'm going to move on. And that's also another problem that exists.
Well, I think what's interesting, too, is that one of the rationales used by the Republicans in doing this is that, oh, well, the Democrats blocked a lot of George W. Bush's nominees. This is just how the game is played in Washington. But if we look back at some of the people that George W. Bush nominated for these federal judgeships, many of them were not from the legal community whatsoever. These are people that didn't go to law school. They've never been a judge. And yet George W. Bush was repaying political favors. I mean, these were business leaders in some aspects. Others were major campaign donors. And he was going to put them on the bench to hear cases about, legal issues that they knew nothing about. These people don't know the law. So you can't draw the comparison, Democrats did it for Bush, we do it for Obama. Because this is apples and oranges here. I mean, we're talking about very qualified judges, waiting in the wings, some of them for 18 months or longer. And we're leaving these holes in the judiciary. And one thing, we've covered this in the Trial Lawyer magazine a couple years back, is that they're having to bring retired judges, some of them in their 90s, to come hear lower court cases so that they can pull the lower court judges to help out with some of these federal cases. I mean, this is a massive problem, isn't it?
It is. And I must tell you, my partner, Alan Simpson, who was a Republican, and Frank Leahy, a Democrat, they served on the Judiciary Committee together. And they really, it wasn't about what the nominees' political views were. It was about whether or not this person was going to be a fair and an honest judge. And unfortunately, in the Bush administration, they were trying to put cronies and associates of George W. Bush on the bench, and they put a lot of them on the bench.
Yeah.
To my dismay, and really trial lawyers on both sides of the aisle dismay. One of the things about President Obama, though, is that in his first term, he could have filled a lot more of these vacancies. Obviously, he was worried about and working on many other things, but he had the votes in the Senate to get these positions filled, and he failed to do it. And right now, the country is paying a price for that with regard to the Republicans who are basically trying to put a standstill on these nominations, which is hurting the entire judicial system.
So with this election coming up next year, do you see this judicial obstruction as a way for Republicans to keep these vacancies open in the hopes that a Republican president will come along after 2016 and pack them full of, these corporate judicial hacks? Do you think that's part of this issue here?
I do. And I think one of the other things is that they don't always pack it with judicial hacks, but they pack it with anti-consumer judges who may have lawyers who may be qualified, but who are anti-consumer. We see right now the Bush appointees, as well as some of the Obama appointees, who, unfortunately, some of the largest firms in the United States are involved in his vetting process. I think we've talked about that before, who are anti-consumer. Where you read in the paper, what's amazing to me is you read in the paper about someone gets $1 million or multi-million-dollar verdict, and you don't read anything more. But what's happening right now is many, in fact, a vast majority of the verdicts of over $1 million are going up to the circuits and getting reversed on grounds, quite frankly, that are not legally sustainable. These are judges who are using political and politicizing, basically protecting the corporations. And I think clearly the Republicans are hoping a Republican president is in there, and they hope to be able to replace Justice Bader Ginsburg and maybe some others who are really consumer advocates, right, who are there to try to help the average person. And so I do think it is a strategy. I think it's a strategy that they hope to retain the Senate, and it's important. People don't understand that if the Republicans retain the Senate, they'll continue to do this, but also get their candidate into the White House.
And that's why those down ballot races, Senate, it matters so much. Control of the Senate is up in this next election. There are far more Republicans than Democrats. I think there's only 10 Democrats, 26 Republicans. That could change the future of who gets nominated for the court and shape these courts for a generation. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Michael Burg, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Farron.